and we were able to verify that the meeting took place in Miami, and there, in fact, we found the police officer who had responded to the shootings that took place during that meeting or shortly thereafter. And we also, from information later on, we were able to verify the fact that on the way to Dallas, they had car troubles, and I think it's Natchioches or something just before you cross the river. She defined it as the road next to the interstate, which I believe was Highway 1, and we were able to verify that they, in fact, had car problems and stopped there to get their car fixed before they went into Dallas. So, to me, it was pretty solid confirmation that this trip actually took place.
Now, Sturgis was there, Marita was there. Did she name
Bosch,
anybody else?
Bosch and Hunt, and I don't know who the other guy was. I used to know, but I forgot.
Okay, so you had Hunt, Bosch, and then Sturgis, and Marita, and then one other man.
Yeah, and
involved.
You'll see different writing, different people have put this together, add up all kinds of people there, but I know, and I used to know who the fifth one was, but it just goes past me right now. So we know.
Okay. Now these were were these the main shooters involved that were going to take their posts?
No, that came out after I interviewed Sturgis, after he was under arrest, and we had him at Marita's apartment. We had him there 2 hours before we took him to the precinct to book him. During those 2 hours.
All right, so let's talk about that. Sturgis walks in and just recap what happened.
And we put him under arrest. There was no doubt in his mind that who was in control at the time, because he knew we weren't kidding around. And we put him under arrest. We searched him to make sure we had control. And then the first thing which we had come up with is I congratulated him for the assassination of Kennedy. And I based that on the Bay of Pigs invasion, because I had physically been at the Bay of Pigs invasion aboard the USS Essex when we bombed the Bay of Pigs for 3 days and 3 nights. And on the morning of the landing for the invasion, John F. Kennedy personally called the USS Essex and stopped the bombing, which was the time that Sturgis then started their attack. And as you know, Sturgis was captured and tortured and everything else. So it was funny when I related that to him, because he said, the only way you know about that is if you were there and you were on the USS Essex. And I told him I was. So then,
now these ships were covered up, right?
Yeah. And then while we were talking, he freely admitted that he had been on the grassy knoll. And, so there was no doubt in my mind he was telling the truth. Because as you know...
Yeah, and this kind of arrogance where he starts admitting things. Now, you gain his confidence because basically what happens here, your ship as well as other American ships were disguised, not readily showing the flags. You were there providing cover for this operation. Sturgis is there in Cuba. He feels as if he was sold out by Kennedy.
Yes,
and feels it's an honorable thing to kill the man, right?
Yeah, well, you don't double-cross people at that level. These guys, it's just something you don't do. And they didn't care who it was. And he made it very clear that that was one of the reasons why he was killed.
And so he has the arrogance, and I think people should know this, to just basically tell you, a police officer, what happened, knowing in the back of nobody would do that unless they knew they would never be prosecuted for the crime and they were protected at higher levels, right?
Well, certainly, because he was never prosecuted for this either, because at one point after we had him arrested, we actually had the tape that was played where he told Marita about, what the rules are in that, and they came up with this that, that wasn't a threat. And to me, anytime Frank Sturgis says something like that, at one time, in fact, he was identified in hearings as the best assassin in the world. I would say that was pretty reliable information, and if he says he's going to kill you, he's going to kill you.
So then you take him to the precinct under a different name, right?
No,
And
we actually...
tell us what went on there.
Well, when we walked in, again, knowing the system, and if you understand how it works in the police department, if you're from headquarters, nobody wants to know who you are. As little as they know, the better they are. So we walked in and we identified ourselves as detectives from downtown, and we booked him under his real name, Frank Forini. And we took him upstairs and booked him. And during the booking, he's entitled to a phone call. Well, the officer or detective, which was myself, I made the phone call, and that phone call was to Gayton Fonzie, who was one of the investigators in the House assassination hearings. And I found it very interesting that one of the suspects in the assassination was calling an investigator from the hearings. So, that always amazed me.
Here he is being accused of crimes to cover up the Kennedy assassination, and who's the first person he calls for help? Those who are supposedly investigating to try to get at the truth.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I spoke to Gayton Fonzie years later when Sturgis died, and it was amazing because as a result of, we believed of that phone call, a man showed up at the station house, Frank Nelson. And we knew who Frank Nelson was. He was a quasi-mob intelligence guy that had also been in Cuba. And he shows up at the station house and goes to the desk officer and says, "Do you have Frank Sturgis here?" And the desk officer says, "No, but we have a Frank Forini." And he says, "Oh, that's the same guy." Well, now the cat's out of the bag, and within a matter of minutes, there were more brass at the precinct and trying to get us to back off. And, you know, by that time we already had him booked, and nobody could do anything. That was the reason, you know, we had a short time period to book him before anybody could stop us.
Okay, so Forini gets booked. Do you have to go to an arraignment then? How does he finally get off before there's any trial?
We went to the arraignment the next day, or in the morning actually, and they had a hearing later on. And at the hearing, the prosecutors determined that, again, Morgenthau's office, that there was no threat. So they let him go, and he sued us. He sued me and my partner in the city of New York for $16 million. And that was a real unbelievable thing. People would never believe that these things really happen in this country, but they do. And,
so anyway, you get sued for false arrest for $16 million in a civil case as well. Yeah. And tell us what happens there, why Farini's on the street again.
Well, the city settled for $2,500 for not doing their job. Me and my partner were commended for acting above and beyond the call of duty, and that was the end of the case.
Yeah. Now, what happens to Merida? I guess they get their way. She never testified. The evidence gets destroyed. What goes on then behind the scenes, as best to your knowledge?
Well, after all this was over with, they knew that, you know, it was they weren't going to be able to kill her because somebody didn't want it to happen, you know. And we were still out there, so they weren't going to try that again. And years later, just before Sturgis died, in fact, both him and Merida went to New York to make a deal to expose all of this in a movie or some TV show or something. I forget what it was. And within a matter of a month or so, Sturgis was dead of lung cancer or something like that. So we always said he got the flu, the CIA flu, you know. So
the CIA flu, yeah, it was his time to go when he starts trying to spill the beans.
See,
Marida's still around. That must have been her message to shut up, right?
Yeah, and you know, all in all, though, Sturgis really believed that he was a true warrior and patriot in our country. He believed